Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. In today's episode, we're continuing our two-part series with Erich Mattei from Reigniting, exploring the life cycle of an optometry practice. In this second part, we shift from the early days of ownership to what comes next, the established and the legacy stage of the business. We'll discuss how to modernize your workflows, expand your scope of care, and reignite growth when your practice feels like it's plateaued. From revitalizing your optical offering to rolling out new services and engaging your team in the process. This episode is packed with practical strategies to help take your practice from good to great. So let's get into it. So if we're then doing a cold start, what are some tips or what some ideas that we can, give to that potential owner with regards to sitting in that particular seat and going, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, start afresh. I've identified the market. This is what I've got to do. What are some tips you've got there for them?
Yeah. So look, think of that cold start process. There's 3 phases: plan, develop, launch. Planning phase. Take the time. You know that market, right? Michael just kind of identified who this persona is. The listeners out there, and you know who I'm speaking to, right?
Yeah.
Listener out there, you've been mulling this over for probably years.
Yep.
Okay. If you're going to get serious about it, you're ready to do it. A couple things you got to do, right? Number 1, immerse yourself in the market. Let's really understand that market. You think you know that market? No, we want to be able to know like wages, income, the household size, like really understand the people that live in that market. Informed with that, get to constructing the business plan. Write that financial pro forma. Be sure that financial pro forma is realistic, both in the startup costs, right? As well as your forecasting into the future. Let's be realistic about that. Take the time to construct that business plan, knowing that when you're going to the bank, having a well-written business plan, it plays all the difference in the amount of financing you're going to be able to secure, right? And again, we've got a lot of really great content about that. We do a ton of business plans also. I mean, that's an amazing world, a very exciting world, but it's through that, it's really the starting point of all this. So again, you think the planning phase, it's all about writing that business plan, constructing that financial pro forma, getting to know your market. In this planning phase also, we would start to get out there and actually explore the market, get partnered up with a realtor who can start showing you properties. And now's where we start to go from planning into like the development phase, right? So it's kind of once we get some sort of pre-approval from financing from a bank. So it's with that business plan that you'll actually go and apply for pre-approval financing, right? And here at Reigniting, we've got relationships with some amazing lenders that get deals done, right? Wow. And our business plans also have a really strong track record of getting deals done at a really high level. But as it were, having access to financing is what then opens the door to be able to go look at properties. Now, it's fascinating to note also that just because you carry debt doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to secure financing for your cold start, right? Okay. You may have student loans. You may carry a home mortgage. I mean, the list can go on. That's not going to preclude you from financing. So again, planning phase, start with establishing the building blocks, establishing the foundation. And what's that through? That's through writing the business plan, constructing the pro forma, and really knowing that market. When you get into the development phase, this is now where you take all the plan that you've already constructed. And by the way, the more thorough and more precise that plan is, the smoother the whole rest of this process is going to go. Because then you're just basically plugging in the pieces. So in the development phase is where you're optimizing the location around the budget and the scope of care as you've observed in that market, right? Because it should never be should never be overlooked that it is ultimately still your vision. We had a client just share with me this week something really amazing that really, I don't know, it was just really cool to hear her say. She's like, Erich, you've without a Krinos, I don't know if I would have ever been confident enough to do this. And she's doing some really radical things in this practice,
awesome.
Michael, really awesome. Radical things. And she's just really cool things that, again, it's about having that plan. So you start with that first in the planning phase, constructing that business plan, constructing that pro forma, getting to know the market. Now in the development phase, with a pre-approval letter from a bank or perhaps a number of banks, now you're ready to go look at property. And you know exactly what's going to inform your budget moving forward. So in working with properties, though, it's vitally important that those numbers jive with that pro forma. Again, the more precise and accurate you are at that pro forma and realistic and dialed into the market, the better it's going to serve you for the next phases of the journey. So as you're exploring the property, then that then kind of starts to go down this path with the design and build out of the space, where you always want to tie things back to the budget. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've overbuilt the space and you're underfurnished with equipment. Flip side of the coin, you don't want to find a situation where you've bought all this equipment, but the space really isn't optimized. So it really is vitally important with a cold start that that budget is really tight and dialed in. Through the development phase, you then get into the build out and working with the contractor. Here, the biggest things here is keeping track and monitoring that budget and consistent communication with those contractors so we can keep them on target for that end of that construction date. We actually have some videos at our YouTube channel around some of this stuff, and particularly from a lease standpoint, the importance of having free rent period, the importance of having certain clauses built into your contractor agreement with your contractor, namely liquidated damages that protects you in the event their build out cycle runs slow.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if build out gets pushed back, but landlord is expecting payment, guess who's on the hook? I mean, this is real world stuff. Again, I mean, and this is why I'm so passionate about the work we do, right? Because we help doctors do this stuff day in, day out.
Yeah.
So from there, development phase, furnishing the office with the equipment. That, by the way, was the equipment that you have already identified earlier in your pro forma when you were kind of like, hey, I want to set up my practice to do this, right? Then sourcing optical frames, establishing your supply chain, all your vendor partners, establishing all of your pricing. If you are working with insurances, credentialing, okay? Then we're getting into the launch phase. Now it's time to start jumping into HR and marketing, right? You want to be sure the timing of this stuff also. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of timing. And the importance of things being on the mark, again, 1 month can have a significant impact between all of a sudden expenses getting cranked up and such. So in the launch phase here, y'all, we're talking about human resources, your org chart, job descriptions, who's doing what, compensation. Vitally important that you compensate your people appropriately. And appropriately is not offering them what they were receiving before if they were employed with some big corporation. You don't have to expect to be paying that. There's value. People want to come and work with a cold start because they want to be a part of something from the ground up. They understand that you're not going to be able to pay them that top dollar. But the reason why they want to go be a part of that is because they believe that you're going to provide for them a work environment and ultimately a career opportunity that they're not getting where they were before, right? So it's vitally important that people are being compensated appropriately. You don't want to underpay. You want to take care of your people, but also you got to protect the finances of your business. So you can't be too nilly-willy on just throwing money around. You really got to be careful of how that compensation impacts the bottom line of the business. And then certainly the marketing piece as well. Community growth is huge. And unfortunately, Michael, it's often overlooked in this day and age where everything's media. And here we are talking halfway around the world from one another, thanks to media. You have to have a digital presence. Be digital presence first. I believe the practices of the future, the ones that are really going to continue to excel, are those that already have that digital connectivity with the patient. But that's not a substitute for community outreach. Because remember, at the end of the day, for advanced as all the technology is, all these cool ways doctors can take care of people's eyes and all these cool things we can do with tech. At the end of the day, optometry is a people business. It's patients that are coming into your place of business and you're interacting with them face to face. You're pressing flesh, as we say.
In person. Yeah.
Exactly. So that being said, and this is something else that we've noticed, and there's a clear difference. If you're cold starting, the doctors that are getting out there working their community and passing out business cards while they're still have their coming soon sign, be ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody yesterday and they don't like the word networking. It's almost like it's like the word power. There's a negative connotation to networking. It seems like it's almost like a bad thing, but I think they phrase it as connecting. And I was like, that's actually a lot more meaningful. Get
Absolutely.
out there and connect with people, because the business is a connection business ultimately in transaction, but then in relationships with, your referral partners and the like. So I think that's a really powerful observation as well. And there's massive tips there that you're given, I think, for a cold start with regards to what they're thinking and what to be looking for. A lot more than I thought, to be fair. And it is a complicated thing. And we could probably speak about this for a couple more hours easily from that point of view. But if we're jumping across now to say the more established practice, and something that you said earlier, and the thing is, again, the business might be established when you acquire it, or, depending on the nature of the individual established. I'm not sure when that time frame actually exists from when you define a business as being an established business. But you spoke about workflows, scope of care, expansion of the scope of care, modernizing. And for me, the way I think about that is almost like, the analogy I always use in this instance is like renovating your house. But, your house, will probably, it does well for 10, 15 years, but things start to get old. Technology changes, whether it's smart automation with the house, things like that. So then you've got to go and you've got to spend and you've got to reinvest in the house and bring it up to speed. And it's almost, I think it's like your business renovation with regards to the established business. And I feel like this is where a lot of our audience sit. They do sit in this spot now where they're basically, okay, we know we've got a successful business. It's really good. How do I take it to the next level? What do I need to do? And it's these workflows and it's this modernization, I think, that will probably reap the most benefit to the listeners from the point of view of them taking something away and going, okay, I can improve my business in this way or that way. So with that in mind, what are some of the key things that you think an established business needs to look at when it comes to, for lack of a better term, that this business renovation process or this modernizing process that you speak of?
Yeah. For starters, Michael, I would define the established business as the business that has paid off the startup or acquisition loan.
Okay. That's a good one.
Right. So, say 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
About there. Right. And, it's important, and you hit the nail on the head, right? It really is important that in running the business, you're reinvesting in the business. Okay. In so doing, that's where you kind of stay current. And we can think of that in any myriad of ways. Everything from the scope of care and the equipment that's being used to provide that care. Because look, the patient experience is number one. If people make note, I mean, come on, we're all consumers. And even when patients are coming into the clinic, they're consuming vision and eye care, right? But they're still consumers.
Absolutely.
So that experience is number one. So when we're talking about modernizing that experience, now you can think everything from the equipment and the scope of care. The scope of care is being offered and the equipment that's being used to provide said scope of care, right? We can think of the optical offerings, eyeglasses, lenses, technologies, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can think of the physical space also. I mean, just think about how that has evolved in time. So as it were, this is where it's really fascinating for that established practice that's like, you know what? I've kind of hit this plateau. And I know there's more opportunity here. Like I can feel it, but I don't exactly know where it is. That's where it's really a combination of looking at the finances and looking at operations and kind of tying back to some of what you do if you're looking to like buy a practice. I mean, it's almost kind of like, hey, do some good due diligence on yourself as the established practice, looking internally. So you want to look at your bottom line, see where money's going. If you're hesitant to invest money, if you're thinking about doing cool things in your practice, but you're hesitant to do it, let's dig into that P&L. Let's find the dollars. And if we can't find the dollars there, perhaps we can create the plan to make the dollars readily available. Okay. If the dollars are there in the P&L, and again, oftentimes there's opportunities to move money around. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, particularly with cost of goods sold. There's a whole lot of opportunity out there across the industry. But then you can look at operations and think operationally, where is their opportunity, right? So for instance, we maybe feel we're hitting a plateau. What's next? Where's the opportunity in our practice? We're looking at the P&Ls. We're seeing, wow, the business does well. It's profitable. So where is the opportunity, right? But then we look over here on the operation side and maybe we discover, wow, we're actually only converting 30% of eyewear to our optical. Yeah, there's huge opportunity there. Again, the P&Ls may look good. We're making money. We're doing well, but we're just kind of like, where's there more opportunity in our business, right? So again, looking in that practice management, kind of that operational performance, identifying the opportunities. That's also where, Michael, I will say in both markets, in US and in Australia, expanding scope of care is huge opportunity in both markets. Now, what that can be is going to vary by market. Heck, even here in the US, what that expansion can be is going to vary by state, right? Optometry is regulated on the state level here in the US. But as it were, there's opportunity to add some degree of scope of care. Specialty vision and eye care, medical vision and eye care, aesthetics, lid hygiene, dry eye. This list can go on. So as it pertains to, hey, we've hit a plateau. It seems like expanding scope of care is kind of all the rage. What should I do? What you don't want to do is you don't want to be that doctor who makes the purchase of the equipment and then it's collecting dust in the unused exam lane and you're paying a note on this thing. And Michael, as much as I hate to say it, this is rampant. It's rampant. Okay?
Yep.
So as it were, let's be strategic about it. Let's understand the practice, understand age demographics across your practice. Perhaps look at different service codes that could inform the potential interest in a service area. For example, maybe you are considering investing in an IPL or radio frequency or some type of device to do in-office treatments, in-office dry eye treatments or something like that. So maybe a novel point to start before investing in the equipment is let's go dig in our practice management software and, kind of harvest our data, like kind of investigate our data and see maybe there's some other service codes we can run that could identify patients who might be candidates for this treatment. You follow?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, or similarly with, we're thinking about myopia, let's get into some myopia management. All right. So let's really understand households there.
And I think that there's a bit of a continuum there as well with regards to when you're emerging, you're doing these types of things and identifying it, and that continues through to this established phase and the reinvigoration. And correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially what you're saying is, a lot of the ways that you can break that if you're sort of plateauing out is to look at incorporating a new service into the practice, a new scope that you haven't, analyze that, be critical, be strategic about that, and then roll that out, because that will then also take a play to your marketing. It will have an HR implication with regards to training and educating your team. I guess that does map that out. And can you speak to maybe some examples where you've seen a business, approach you and plateau and then say, okay, we've decided we want to take up myopia management or dry eye treatment, diagnostics and treatment. How have you seen that roll out, and what are the key aspects? Again, identifying that, this expanding scope of care is probably an avenue that an established practice can take to help improve sales. How can they actually have that work for them, I guess, in a practicality sense? And how have you seen that work in a successful context?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So think of it as kind of 3 steps, right? So starting with the analysis. And the analysis, oftentimes internal patient analysis. Hey, let's look at who's currently in the practice, but also an external analysis, because there may be a whole untapped market out there that just drives by your office every day because you don't have anything that appeals to them. Okay. So you want to look internally and look externally, identifying that opportunity. Once the opportunity has been identified, then it's a matter of step 2, putting together the strategy. And this is where things things fall apart. Actually, things kind of fall apart at any one of the three stages. But where things fall apart from the strategy side is where the plan is failing to really engage all of the key stakeholders. And think of the stakeholders as being the practice, the bottom line of the business. So it's got to be something that's going to be in the best interest of the bottom line because we're running a business to make money.
That's
okay.
it.
Number two, it's got to serve patients. Because if it's not going to serve patients, it's not going to delight, further enhance quality of life of patients. Why are we doing it? Right. And number three, our team. This has to be something that we can functionally put into the practice in the workflows. Yeah. So we call this a stakeholder-centric strategy, and it's so vitally important that it's a stakeholder-centric strategy. Think of it as like the three-legged stool. If any one of those stakeholders, the profit of the practice, the patient experience, or our team and the day-to-day workflows, if any one of those three stakeholders somehow became to be like kind of marginalized or left out, it's not going to happen.
No, it's such a critical thing.
So now we can start thinking, we'll use that example I used a moment ago, talking about the practice that buys the equipment because it was on the deal at the show, or because the trade group alliance put it on a special and they wanted to get in on it. So they bought the device and it cost them a lot of money and they're financing the device, but the device hasn't taken off in their practice. Clearly, one of those three things was missing.
Yeah.
The case was made for the P&L because that's when they got all the marketing promotional, and the rep comes and sees them, and the rep buys them the dinner, or they see them at the trade show. They understand how it'll hit the P&L. They've evaluated it clinically. They've seen the white papers. They've demoed it at the show. The reps obviously have come in and shared the white papers, the studies. So, okay, for our patients, it makes sense.
Yeah.
For our team, the workflow.
It hasn't been covered.
On the workflow piece also, you have to think of the merchandising of it and the marketing and merchandising of it.
Yeah.
Because you could have a really tight workflow, but if you're doing a really crummy job of marketing it and merchandising it, then it's not going to get lift. So again, you're the established practice. You've hit the plateau. You're thinking, man, I know there's opportunity in my practice. All right, first, let's analyze the business. You're looking to add the specialty that makes the best sense to your business and your community.
Yeah.
Then create a stakeholder-centric strategy for this. So be sure we know exactly how it's going to hit our bottom line. We know exactly how it's going to serve patients. And then we know how we're going to activate it in the practice. And in activating in the practice, it's a workflow thing. What is your team going to be doing? But it's also a marketing and merchandising thing. And that leads you to the third phase, and that's the implementation. And now it's time for all these things to come into play. So all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, established practice owner, you've hit the plateau. If you're not having a weekly team meeting, start doing it. And you're going to find that plateau is going to be in that rearview mirror.
Right.
And if you'd like some help structuring those, looking at the right analytics, reach out to us at Acrinos.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
That's where, and that's where it ties back to implementation, Michael. So that third piece, you start with the analysis, then you create the strategy. The third piece, the implementation, is all about consistent follow-up, right? Yeah. Now, in following up, we got to be sure we're monitoring the metrics. So you can't follow up just with a verbal check-in, right? Hey, how's it going, team? No, let's look at some numbers, okay? But also seek to understand, celebrate the wins with your team. And this is something also that applies, established practice, anything that you're looking to deploy in your practice, anything that's new, celebrate the wins, celebrate the little things. When you celebrate the little things, you're in charge. You're signing people's paychecks. You're the source of their income. When you pay them a compliment and celebrate the little things that they've done, that's going to go a really long way. Really long way. It's going to pay you 10 times over, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So celebrate the wins, especially when you're starting to do new things in the practice. Celebrate
and
those
that's not
wins.
just financial wins, right? That could be being an attitude thing. There are other things that you can celebrate as opposed to, we've made an awesome sale today.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's more
absolutely
holistic in nature. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's such a critical part of the implementation. That's where implementation falls apart, is because there's the lack of the follow-up and the pull-through and the accountability. And, be proactive about it. And I'll say this, if you've done a good job of establishing a good stakeholder-centric strategy and you've laid it out to your team and to your stakeholders in an appropriate manner, it's going to take flight.
Yeah.
And now you can't rest on the sideline. You have to be doing the steps, right? It's kind of like prepping for the marathon. You can't just go take off. Like, you got to put in the work, It's such a critical,
you mentioned the three-legged stool, and, getting the team on board is such a critical aspect. And I feel like that's probably out of, people can look at it financially, they can see the opportunity, but it's how you onboarded it onto the team and how the team, bought into that process, and are they on board? Has it been a workshop? Have the workflows been established? And that is, I think, it's not any more important than any of the three aspects that you speak about. It's just as important, but I feel like it's not treated with the same importance. And maybe that's because you have a reliance with the relationships in the store that have already been established. You've got a comfort there. And so you don't really, and again, I'm speaking about small independent practices. Your corporates probably have a little bit of a different strategy in this, but time and time again, you do see that. So I think that pickup is a really, really critical one. And how you, then that leads into the meetings that you're having and the quality of the conversations that you're having internally about the integration of new technologies and the new services that are offered, as well as just the general operations of the business, I feel. And it's a really critical aspect to that. When we speak about workflows, and it's something that you've thrown out quite a bit, I think it's fair to say that most independent businesses, now a lot of them will have, depending on the nature of how they've developed over the years, but I'd say it's fair to, it would be fair to say that there aren't many independent private practices that have really well-known established workflows other than what you just know what to do. I feel that, how can a practice start to review workflows knowing that it's probably going to be a very daunting, and again, they can obviously seek advice and seek assistance, definitely. But what would you say to that practice owner that's in that position? And again, we've identified that perhaps, we've got the path of, of adding a new area of service, but maybe there could be improvement just in operational context with regards to what they're doing now with the implementation of processes and workflows. So someone that's in that boat, what sort of tips would you have for them, and what would you say to them just starting to review that, and then obviously the continuum of reviewing that?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating arena, particularly now as we're seeing more and more technology come into the fold, where there were tasks that we used to perhaps rely on more people in office, tasks that are now being able to done in a remote manner, in a virtual manner. Yeah. Now, Michael, I look at this through the lens of, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Now we can free up our people in office. We can free them up to further delight our patients, connect with them as people face to face, right? So it's very exciting. But as it were, a couple of moving parts here as we're talking workflows. First and foremost, it has to do with personnel. So think org chart. What does your organizational chart look like? Who is reporting to whom? Number two, job descriptions. So now take each of those seats in that org chart and let's really build out these job descriptions. From there, think of the training organizer that would drive that, right? As you start to get more into like the nitty gritty detail. And to your point, Michael, right? I mean, look, a lot of small business, you just do it, right? Like you're taught, you teach, the people there teach the new person just does it. It's not really documented anywhere, okay?
Nope.
But this is the kind of stuff that when we start thinking about these things that have businesses plateau, and I'm not talking about the plateau of like what we were just talking about before, like, hey, I think my business can grow more. I'm talking plateau of like where these things just kind of like stall out, if you will. A lot of it ties back to some of these fundamental pieces that are they're just overlooked or not really addressed. Now, it doesn't mean just because it's been operating this way for the last X number of years doesn't mean it can't be changed. It absolutely can be changed. It's your business. You sign the paychecks. You're serving the patients. You're the owner of these bank accounts. I mean, the business is in your name. So it's absolutely at any time. Now, the beauty of the cold start, the doctor just purchased the practice, is that you can do this stuff from the get-go, okay?
Yeah.
But for those of you that are in the established practice or even the legacy practice, you're like, hey, like I want to tighten this stuff up. I'd like to stress less about my business. I'd like to leave the business at the office. I'd like to not wake up in the middle of the night and have business things hitting me in the face. Okay.
Yeah.
It ties back to some of these things. Okay. So getting back to this with the workflows, org chart,
Yeah.
then job descriptions, the specifics of what each seat does. Then think of proficiencies. So training organizer, what do these people need to be capable of doing? Okay. From there, once you have that team optimized, then it's a matter of plugging in the pieces of the team by the different patient types. And this gets really fascinating. And this could lend itself to a much, much deeper conversation than we're kind of jumping into right now. But when you start thinking about, particularly here in the US market, where we have increasingly more and more states are expanding scope of care to where our optometrists are doing YAG and SLT lasers, and our optometrists are doing minor surgical procedures. It's fascinating. It's tremendously exciting. Okay. But that being said, we now have to think about now these new workflows coming into the practice, because you've got a practice that can be taking care of primary care optometry, performing a comprehensive eye exam, fitting contact lenses, dispensing eyeglasses, providing specialty care, maybe specialty contact lens fits, dry eye aesthetics, providing medical care, glaucoma, macular degeneration. I mean, the list can go on. Now providing surgical care, doing YAGs and SLTs. So if you think of all these different patient cases, and then now let's go back to medical, and now let's think of like a glaucoma patient versus an AMD. I mean, we can start going in all these different directions. So if you've got that org chart and those job descriptions, though, then now we can start plugging in these pieces of who is to do what in the practice. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a really good example is a practice we work with here in the U.S. They have 4 doctors in the practice, and they each kind of have different proficiencies. 2 of them are pretty well matched up, and then the others kind of have different proficiencies. So as it were, we look at this established practice. It's a very high volume practice. And we think, well, okay, what's the best way to optimize the patient flow based on the provider scope of care? Right? So getting very definitive, very strategic in knowing what patient types we want going to which doctors to ensure that the care is provided to the highest level, and to also ensure that the practice, that it's the most profitable arrangement. Okay. So, because, and our listeners in the US audience will know, you can have 2 doctors providing the same care to a glaucoma patient. One of them gets amazing reimbursements. One of them is struggling to keep their doors open. Why? The whole revenue cycle. So again, this is a whole other arena of the business it's not until you take the time to like look at the business as a business that you start to identify, okay, where really is the need?
Totally. And I feel like what that speaks to is almost looking at the people and the capability of the business as it stands and matching the capabilities to the service. And then also, I think most importantly, identifying the deficiencies in the team potentially and how you're going to overcome that. Because let's say we're talking about processes, and one of those processes could be training and ongoing training of the staff, you know, with any number of tools. It's like, well, if you don't have somebody in there that's really pushing and driving that, it's obviously going to fall back to the business owner to do that. And ultimately when that happens, that's when you are waking up at 3 a.m. going, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But if you can understand, you know, who your team is, what your ideal team looks like, and obviously there are financial implications to this with regards to what you can and can't do, say if you don't have the right people, or if you need to make adjustments in that regard. And that definitely goes down a whole other HR conversation. And from what I know, the American HR rules and the Australian HR rules are totally different. In Australia, it's a very complicated area with regards to that. But I did, whether it's the optom or the doctor, or whether it's the optical dispenser or the optical assistant, or, you know, the training manager or the practice manager, scoping out what that org chart looks like, doing the JDs, and then maybe doing what your ideal business looks like. And I feel like once you know what that looks like, then you can start the process of your workflows. And I feel like even as a take home from today's conversation, you know, if you're listening to this, you know, do an org chart and update your job descriptions. And that could be the start of your first lot of, you know, of workflows. And then from that, think about what you want to do ideally and how you want things to be. On that note, and a question that I had, and it's more of a general kind of question, because the last thing I do want to talk about is the succession planning and what that looks like sort of at the back end of the business life cycle for the business is, what does mentoring have to do with all this? Obviously, a lot of the times, business owners don't really know. Small independents generally, or independents, can be quite isolated in nature. There are networks, there are groups. How important is that? And what would the role of mentoring be in all of this, and sort of getting advice and, getting assistance with things like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Mentoring is huge, Michael. I mean, absolutely. We've all got folks. I'm sure you got mentors. And I've got mentors in different aspects of my life. And as it were, a couple of things on that front. Yes, you absolutely have to have somebody you can lean on, right? And that's where, when we talk about mentors, it's not, we typically think of mentors being like senior, junior, kind of like this definitive, like, I know it, you don't know it, so I'm your mentor. And then for the mentee, I don't know it, and you know it, so I'm your mentee, right? But there's also a lot of value in just peer-to-peer mentorship and collaboration, things that can come through that, right? That co-accountability, that co-support, if you will. So as it were, I'll tell you something that we love to do. And by the way, I thoroughly enjoy mentoring. As a matter of fact, getting the opportunity to do some mentoring here at my alma mater, Loyola University in New Orleans.
Right.
Very exciting. As my mentee from the Launch U program is getting ready to make his pitch here later this week. So I'm really excited to see that. But as it were, the mentorship is huge. So connecting with folks that you can lean on, and also they're going to hold you accountable to it. I'll tell you something we love to do in Acrinos is when we find opportunities to kind of match clients up, just folks that we identify like, hey, y'all might hit it off. Would you be open to an intro? And
absolutely.
To see how some of those relationships have evolved over the years, it's just really awesome. I mean, look, it's all part of, I think, the community of entrepreneurship, because anybody that's gone in the entrepreneurial journey knows what it is. I mean, whether you're doing optometry practice or consulting business or, anything.
Yeah.
So that being said, the mentorship piece is big, but understand the reason why mentorship is so important, I believe, is because it ties back to accountability.
Yeah.
That's why I see mentorship as not being so much as mentor, you are senior, you are all knowing. As mentee, you are like a subordinate. I disagree with that. I look at mentorship. I used to think of it in that manner, but now I look at it very much more so from like, mentorship truly is about accountability. And we start to look at it through that lens. Now we realize that we all have mentors in our lives, right? So even you listeners out there, right? If you've been listening to this episode and you're the emerging practice owner, get ready to go for it, cold starter buying, or maybe you're the established practice owner, you've hit the plateau, you're wondering what's next, or you're that legacy practice owner and you're ready to plan the exit. Think about those peers you have that can relate to you, that are in the same boat. You guys may find yourselves are mentors to one another through what? Through shared experience, but through accountability. And that's really a key driver here is accountability. And even in the context of this, Michael, right? Like we have a nice conversation. Folks are listening to this. They might be feeling good, smiling, getting some ideas. Okay, so now what? What are you going to do about it? Is this just going to be like a fun time you had listening to a dude in the US and a dude in Australia talking shop? Or are you going to like roll your sleeves up and get to work? The accountability,
And that's why I think I bring it in at this point, because so often with the established business, as I guess we've come to know them now, there is that emphasis to do better and to be better and to modernize and to upgrade and to, regenerate and all those types of, warm and fuzzy words. But ultimately, you do need that person that's going to drive you to do that. And who that looks like could be different to anyone. But ultimately, it does come back to accountability. It's a word I wrote down because you had mentioned it before. And it's what's going to keep you honest and accountable to get it done. Because when you are an entrepreneur or when you are a small business owner, there is no one's going to do it for you. But you can find people like you that are like-minded that basically can assist you and guide you. Any tips for finding one? I mean, I know in Australia there are obviously groups and there are associations that you can join. And that's obviously probably the first point of call. I mean, reaching out to, people that you might know or may not know in that regard. What tips do you have for finding a mentor?
Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, get involved in any community you're a part of.
Yeah.
Right. Now, here in the US, I would highly encourage all optometrists get involved in your state association, get involved in the American Optometric Association, finding peers in your state of residence that you can come to partnering with, finding a mentor in that regard is going to be huge. Outside of that, also entertain other communities you're a part of. I mean,
well, you might need to, because you might not be an optometrist, right? So many business owners in Australia now aren't optometrists. And so, those associations are only generally limited to you being an optometrist. So if you're not, you actually don't get access to it, which is obviously why we've identified that as a bit of a need and are building some things on that notion. But ultimately, there is more than just the optometry owner. And I'm not sure if it's the same in the States or whether optometrists are generally the practice owner too. Do you have situations and circumstances where it's the dispenser or the optician?
So here in the U.S., the optometrist is generally the practice owner. We're talking private practice. Generally an optometrist that's in practice ownership.
Wow.
There are instances, though. There are practices out there
that minority
are owned by an optician and may have an optometrist as an employed or a 1099 contractor. Yeah, but those are more the exception to the general rule.
Oh, yeah. So in Australia, that's probably, and depending on what state you're in, like I know there are some states where it's predominantly dispenser-owned practices or optician-owned practices.
Sure.
And maybe that's what I'm speaking to, because I think for the optoms, they've got that network that's pretty well established that they can reach to. But I think, if you are a dispenser, reaching out to whether it's groups like, ODA or different industry associations that are more holistic in nature too, I think is probably the main thing. And we'll put some links in the show notes for that.
And that's what I was going to say. The broader thing is whatever you're a part of, whatever you're a member of, look there, right? I mean, if it's whatever type of community organization you're a part of. And Michael, I know you guys are building I know you've shared with me and I go around the website, you guys are building some amazing resources and community in that context as well, right?
But it's the purpose of the podcast, to be fair. It is to find that community and build that community and let that community know that there are people out there that are willing to assist and connect. I think most importantly, the conversations that we have, that are really enjoyable and are so insightful, are conversations that wouldn't be open to a lot of people, in the Australian market anyway, from that context or in this context. So just listening to something like this might inspire that next thing. And that's, I guess, the beauty of it all, which I love doing. If we're talking about succession planning now, and we're looking at sort of that final piece of the puzzle in terms of how we're framing today's conversation, what should independent practice owners or private practice owners think about when it comes to succession, the exit strategy? I mean, I think we've mentioned it's probably something you want to consider at the early stages of acquisition. But when you're sort of now in that part of going, okay, now it's time to think about moving on or, the next part of life, what that may look like. What tips do you have for that? And can you speak to that in some capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the number one tip is know what you want. If you want to sell your practice, your legacy business to the next generation of independent practice owner, then do that and be proactive and start early. If you want to sell to M&A, if you want to sell to P&E, take the steps you need to do to make your business attractive to PE, because PE is only coming for attractive businesses. I will say that.
So, and just to clarify, so we're talking mergers and acquisitions, private equity.
Private equity, yes.
Yes. Okay.
So that's number one. That's number one is know what you want. Number two, start early. You got to get proactive on this.
How early is early?
3 years out. If it's less than 3 years and you're starting to do this, like I would say you're kind of behind. Or I wouldn't say you're behind. Let me put it this way. If you're 3 years out, you still have an opportunity to impact your business. In the process of getting this thing prepared to list, prepared to sell, you can still have an impact in that business. But if it's anything shorter than that, you may be kind of like locked into whatever the history was, right? But it's so important to start early also, Michael, because look, there's so many practices that are sitting and they're sitting. Doctors are wanting to get out, but they're not reaching out. They're not engaging. Yeah. And I don't necessarily mean reaching out to a broker or reaching out to a team like Acrinos that lists practices through our marketplace. I'm talking about get out there in your community. To our U.S. audience, if you're considering retirement in the next 5 years, get out of your state association. Be sure that everybody in your state association knows, Dr. Such and Such is looking to get out in the next 3 to 5 years. Like that's where it comes from. That's where it starts. Because I'll say this.
That itself is probably going to increase the price of the practice just by that one simple act.
Absolutely. Well, furthermore, I mean, look, there's so many fascinating ways you can set these deals up, and so many ways that established doctors can empower the next generation, and they themselves get amazing payouts from their practices in just remarkable ways to set these things up. But you got to start early. You can't sit on the sideline. You can't, let me put it this way. You've worked too hard to come to a point in your career where you're burnt out and you don't have an exit set up. Like you kind of owe it to yourself and your loved ones, if they have vested interest in this as well, you kind of owe it to all parties involved to not try to take this thing to the bitter end until you're miserable going into the office. Right? Totally. Start now, start early, be proactive. Be proactive also where you're still excited about it. You're going to have that motivation, that drive to do what needs to be done. If you're working with your consultants and they've identified, hey, yeah, this is what it would go to now. But, if you can get you on this plan over the next few years, we can get to clean this P&L up, get back to growth, show some increase in profit, identify the exact ways you can impact that bottom line. You put in that work, it can be a totally different exit from you versus, and we all know who they are. Those in the U.S. market, every one of us in the industry know who those folks are in our respective markets. Who really, it's time to raise your voice, spread the word.
So make it known, I guess. Any other main tips that you'd have there, for somebody entering that phase? 3 years, I think that's a good tip as well. So knowing that you still need to allow yourself at least 3 years.
Be sure your CPA is aware of this. And if you are one of those doctors that doesn't work with a CPA, whether you're working with an accountant who's a non-CPA, or perhaps you've done all your own bookkeeping and accounting over the years, absolutely get with a CPA now, years out. I guarantee you there are problems with your financials. You're going to want to be sure you have a professional like a CPA to get you cleaned up, charting your path for success, kind of for the duration of this. Also, legal. And Michael, look, this is where really I'll tie back to those 3 pillars of due diligence. Financial due diligence, got to get the financial house in order. Working with folks like us would give you the insight into how to make the business more profitable. Understand, CPAs aren't necessarily in the business of showing for a business to be more profitable. They don't know the industry. They can perhaps identify basics like, if you spend less on cost of goods, your profit will go up. It's like, come on. A 6-year-old knows that. But, that's right. I'm talking about actually identifying profit-driven opportunities in vision and eye care, the likes of which only industry professionals know. But as it were, financial due diligence, you got to get those books cleaned up. Legal due diligence, remember we were touching on earlier, you got to have a lease. If you're going to sell this business, that buyer needs to have a place to call that business home. That bank wants to be sure that your buyer has a place to call it home. So if you own the real estate, then start to consider what you're going to do with that. Are you going to want to be the landlord, or are you going to want to sell the real estate? If you don't own the real estate, be sure that that lease is still in good standing. And if you are approaching the end of the lease, that landlord is ready to write another long-term lease to an eye care provider. Because if they are not, I hate to say this, but you're going to have a tough time finding a bank to lend that buyer top dollar if they're going to have to immediately relocate it, if you're even able to sell it. I mean, really, like this is, it's vitally important. It's vitally important. The legal due diligence in that lease, if you're going to be selling, is tight. Then the third area, Michael, is the operational piece. Now is the time. Look 3 to 5 years out. What kind of business operations do you want to be showing off as someone's coming to buy this thing? What do you want them to see? Okay. And I'll tell you right now, you can have a business that can come back at a valuation of 90% to gross revenue. You can have businesses that struggle to scrape 30%. You can have businesses that are generating nearly $1 million of top line gross revenue, whose books are in such disarray because they never work with a CPA that we can't find a bank to write a loan. Wow. So this is serious. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you're not necessarily going to see written in the articles and in LinkedIn where everybody's like celebrating the successes, oh, I sold my business over required. Like what you don't hear are the horror stories from businesses that are not set up to sell. And there's a process to that. It's vitally important that those steps are followed.
That's a good tie-in too, because I think the same things that you look for when you're purchasing a practice is the same things that you need to be looking for when you're selling the practice, because it's those fundamental metrics that create value for both sides of the equation, I think. And so it's a good tie-in there. You did mention early on that, with these legacy sort of practices, it is dripping with opportunity right now. I think that was the phrase that you used with regards to how much opportunity there is in the industry now with these practices that are 20, 30, years along the line. And they really are open to this concept of, working maybe with a younger optom or working with and we see it happen all the time. And that's invariably most of the ways that these succession plans do occur with optometrists from that point of view. Can you speak to what maybe a young optom needs to be looking for when it comes to identifying this future partnership or this opportunity? And if there is a bit of a succession planning where, a business is looking at transitioning to a optom as opposed to selling to a conglomerate or to a private equity, which we'll talk about as well, because there are some pitfalls in that it's good to make known. What would you say to that, seller and potential buyer when it comes to being an older optom selling to a younger optom for the sake of, I guess, explanation?
Yeah, absolutely. So if this is in the instance of a partnership, it's vitally important that a partnership be structured in both parties' best interest. And as it were, a key tenet of that ties back to the executive compensation. So to put this in context, if you're a practice owner that's looking to take on a partner in the business, maybe it's someone who's already been an associate in your practice that you're bringing on as a partner, or maybe it's someone that you're saying, hey, I am looking for an associate partner, like immediate partner path, okay? Historically, as the practice owner, you are used to having sole responsibility of the business, and as such, being the sole beneficiary of all of the profits of the business, all of the production of the business. When bringing in this partner, though, understand that now that's going to be different, because now it's not only just you. And whether it's going to be 50-50, 51-49, or any other schedule of distribution of ownership, it's imperative that the executive compensation is set up appropriately and that the executive duties are also established appropriately between the partners. So we're talking about executive compensation. It's around three areas: clinical compensation, executive compensation. What are my C-suite duties, executive duties in the business? Then the third is going to be the profit share, right? So it's vitally important that all that stuff is established and it's equitable to both parties. Now, from there, it's also, if we then look at this other legal facet of the partnership piece, this is where we're talking about the operating agreement. And the operating agreement is what's going to bind both parties to all of those responsibilities. And Michael, I would love to say that it's all peace in the valley and sunshine and rainbows. And while it is for many partnerships, it is not uncommon. There are a lot of partnerships that are not good marriages. They're not good business marriages. And I'll say this, the one common denominator that we have found in our experience, every last one of these situations where a partnership is not an equitable partnership is because these steps were not taken. And they were not documented, and they were not bound in a contract. So what I'm talking about there is the math of all this stuff has got to work. The math has got to math and work with the bottom line and the financials. But then the operating agreement has got to be written by an attorney and notarized and put into force. If not, all of this stuff, I mean, that's when the problems start to arise.
Absolutely. So, but you've got to know about that. And that's the challenging part. I mean, so many people will go into it with good intention. And unfortunately, good intention in its own right is not going to get it across the line. And I think that's why so many people fall apart, because they'll work on this gut feel. Oh, I like this person. I like that person. We get along. And you can. But then when the numbers start talking or something legally comes up and it's like, well, hold on, and they act in a certain way and you act in a certain way, and there hasn't been pre-planned as much as it possibly can. And that's where experience comes into play, and reaching out to people that have done it before and seen it happen successfully, and learning from that, I think, is really critical, because just because you get along with somebody in one context doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get along with them in another context, and especially when it's high stakes and high pressure. I feel like there's a lot that can go wrong, and you need to implement that strategy, and that goes out to speaking to people that have done it before and know what's happening, as opposed to trying to wing it or think that or think that you can just get it done because you like the person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's say you're looking at selling as well, and you get a knock on the door, and it's one of these private equity firms. I'm sure you've been associated with some businesses that were looking at selling and eventually took the path of selling to a private equity business. And there aren't that many in Australia, to be fair. So, most of the time we know who we're talking about here. I can imagine over there's a few more. But what does that generally look like? And what's that long-term play that you've seen? And what opportunity does it present, if ever?
Yeah. So you can expect in the private equity world, you can expect that you're going to be asked, in order to get the top dollar, you're going to be kept around for a number of years, oftentimes 3 to 5 years. In so doing, you lose all control of your business. You are no longer running that operation. You are now an employee seeing patients. In that context, what we typically observe, again, here in the U.S. market, oftentimes private equity will come in kind of the first year, leave things alone. You're seeing your patients, your staff, it's continuing operations as is. Come year 2, though, is when the changes really start to take place in the practice. Okay. And it can be any myriad of changes that are taking place, from staffing, workflows, operations, scope of care, the products in the optical, customer service, patient relationships and stuff like that. All of these things, absolutely. If you put yourself in the shoes of private equity, what are they looking to do? Where do they make money? Especially if they've already perhaps paid a premium for buying a practice. How do they make money? It's all in the changes that are being made. That's how they are making their money, right?
Absolutely.
So, that's a fascinating world unto itself, Michael. It really is, because when you dig into the data and start to see the stakeholder fallout after practice has been absorbed by private equity, it's a real thing. And you don't necessarily see this stuff broadcast across LinkedIn or broadcast across industry publications. No, all you see is the good stuff, because the companies put out the content that promotes all the good stuff. But it's the other side of that equation in the fallout and stuff like that. So that's where I really think it's important for doctors that are looking to exit. Hey, look, it's your choice. If you want to sell to private equity, go for it. There's opportunity out there, right? I believe there's more opportunity in transitioning independently. I firmly believe there's far more opportunity. And Absolutely. I also believe that there are a lot of doctors right now that are not raising their voice, that they're wanting to sell because they're holding out that they're going to get a letter from private equity, and it's a letter that's never going to come. So, that's, when you look at the reality of this, the practices that are entertained by private equity, typically they're bigger players in a market, or they have multi-locations. That's how private equity wants to come in. They want to come in where they can kind of really have an impact in that market. So they'll usually go for size, like volume and stuff like that. Yeah. So if you're not one of those practices and you're looking to exit, y'all get out there and start telling other doctors in your community that you're looking to do it, because that's where your buyer is going to come from.
Yeah. And from what I've seen, you pretty much lose the legacy of the practice in anything you've ever built up, because effectively what happens is they come in and they will pitch themselves that they're going to remain independent, or maybe not, or whatever that may look like. But ultimately what happens is, within a couple of years, whatever you've built up with that business has been washed away, and has been, because in effect they are as good as a corporate in terms of how they're structured. There is no real independence about their options and their choice. And again, this is for the most part, maybe not always the case. I'm sure there are some exceptions, as there always is. But for the most part, you do lose that. So if it is a seller that wants to maintain the legacy that they've built, I think if they're coordinated in how they transition to the next generation, there might be that upkeeping of legacy that they've started. and a continuation of that, as opposed to going down the corporate path. You may get the money, and money sometimes talks, and everything else walks. But at the end of the day, it depends what's important to you, I feel. So, and that's being seen more and more. Obviously, again, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it started to come into the market. It's pretty much a known quantity now. So you're familiar with what they're looking for and what's going to happen and what that 3 or 4 year plan may be for them. So I guess people are a little bit mindful of that. But interesting to get your perspective. We've spoken about so many things today. And to be fair, like, I've got a million other questions about a million other things that we've spoken about. But I'm obviously mindful of time. I do want to wrap it up. And the final question I have for you is, if you could give one piece of advice to a young optometrist or a young independent optical owner or potential owner in Australia, and they're considering ownership, what would it be?
One piece of advice.
Yes.
Go for it.
I love it.
Go for it. But don't go for it without the plan.
Yeah.
Strategy. So I would say the one piece of advice. Rewind the episode, y'all, because I kind of walked you through those steps, okay?
Yeah.
But that is construct the plan. Know your community, know your market, know your vision and the scope of care you're wanting to provide, and roll your sleeves up and get realistic. Write that business plan, construct that financial pro forma.
Yeah. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best ways that they can?
Absolutely. Look, y'all, head on over to akrinos.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Would love to answer any questions you might have. And wherever you are in that journey, good luck to you, because it is a journey, right? It's a grind. But like I said, if you're taking these right steps and you're looking at the right analytics and you're building the strategy and you're staying diligent and you're proactive about it also, you're not sitting on the sideline waiting for somebody else to do it. You got to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to make it happen. Absolutely.
Love it. Yeah. Awesome. And those links will be in the show notes too. So if anyone wants to reach out to Erich and his team, just head to the show notes and there'll be links there so you can reach out to him. But Erich, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really insightful conversation with so many practical tips and definitely so many gold nuggets for our listeners there. So hopefully they've had a notepad and pen and they've been taking some notes along the way or been bookmarking it along the way, because I think there was just so many good pieces of information there. So thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.